Thank you so much for inviting me, Emily, for that really kind introduction, and to all of you for coming. I am so thrilled to be back here giving a talk in the room where I sat as a graduate student many times, listened to very many talks, and it's really a great feeling to be on the other end. And to be presenting my research before my advisors, Hannah Kronfeld and Robert Alter. This is really a special treat. What does it mean to write when you inhabit the borderline between Hebrew and Arabic? Salman Masalha, a Palestinian citizen of Israel, begins a poem by declaring, Ani kotev ivrit, I write Hebrew, and then infuses that action with shades of wonder and possibility. In an opposing poetic maneuver, Sami Shalom Shitrit, a Moroccan-born Jewish-Israeli writer, challenges his readers, declaring, Ani kotev lechem shirim balashon ashdodit, shelo tavinu milah. I write you poems in Ashdodian, a non-existent language, so you won't understand a word. The Palestinian Arab who embraces Hebrew and the Moroccan Jew who disavows Hebrew are mirror images, at once equal and opposite. They are equally provocative in their rejection of the norms surrounding language, identity, and belonging in the State of Israel. Furthermore, both poetic declarations are tempered by the subtext of the unvoiced language, Arabic, the mother tongue of both Masalha and Shitrit. What then is the place of Arabic in these two Hebrew poems about linguistic possession and transgression? More broadly, in the intensely politicized space of Israel-Palestine, how do Hebrew and Arabic interact? Poetic Trespass addresses those questions by examining the lives and afterlives of Arabic and Hebrew within Israeli literature, culture, and society. In Israel, Hebrew is the cornerstone of national identity, while Arabic is considered an inferior tongue valued mainly for its uses in the military and state security services. Hebrew is used by Palestinians, but is viewed as the cultural property of the Jewish people. Conversely, Arabic has been delegitimized for Jews, despite the long history of Jewish creativity in that language. In short, writing across those borders of language and identity is at once an aesthetic and a political choice. So then, what happens when Palestinians write in Hebrew and Jewish Israelis write in Arabic? And alternatively, what does it mean for second and third generation Mizrahi Jews born to Arabic-speaking parents and grandparents to write in a Hebrew that cannot elide the traces of the Arabic language past? In 1979, Anton Shammes, then a young poet and now the most established Palestinian writer of Hebrew, titled his second poetry collection, Shetach Hefker, No Man's Land. The volume closes with these lines, I do not know a language beyond this, and a language beyond this, and I hallucinate in the no man's land. From his vantage point in the middle of this no man's land, the poet looks out first at one language, then at the other. This metaphor invokes the double meaning of safa, language, which in Hebrew also connotes a bank, edge, or border. The Hebrew for no man's land, Shetach Hefker, literally a territory of abandonment, signified the partition that divided Jerusalem into Arab and Jewish sections from 1948 to 1967. As Gil Eyal notes, the word Hefker is an intensely loaded term that in the Jewish tradition connotes lawlessness and loss. In Arabic, the term for no man's land is al-ard al-haram, literally a forbidden territory. The word haram also bearing theological weight. In the early 1980s, not long after the publication of his poem, Shammas had prophesied, this whole thing is a kind of cultural trespassing, and the day may come when I will be punished for it. Nonetheless, I argue that there is a redemptive side to such acts of trespass. In the literary context, the no man's land is at once a space between Hebrew and Arabic and a space outside the ethnocentric domain that equates Hebrew with Jewish and Arabic with Arab. The no man's land provides a zone of passage for symbols and ideas to migrate between the two languages. In short, it is a space of poetic trespass, where writers transgress the boundaries of language and identity inscribed in the socio-political codes of the state. Jewish and Palestinian writers have continuously reinvented the relationship of Hebrew and Arabic, even in the absence of political dialogue. The book traces the interaction of the two languages over the course of a century, from the inception of Zionist settlement to the present. And I demonstrate how Arabic served as a defining I demonstrate how Arabic served as a defining presence during the modern Hebrew revival and was then transformed into a language of absence, the language of the Arab other, the language of the erased Arab-Jewish past. In mapping this terrain, I pause at some symbolic landmarks. We might begin with the Hebrew Bedouin, an expression of early Zionist fascination with the Orient and envy of Palestinian indigeneity. In the early days of Zionist settlement, Arabisms and Hebrew speech were a trend among Jewish youth, and especially among members of Hashomir, the Guardsmen, a paramilitary underground organization founded in 1909. A full century later, Israeli film critics evinced fascination with the quote-unquote Israeli Arabic represented in the 2009 feature film Ajami, which portrayed Palestinian Israelis in Jaffa code switching between Arabic and Hebrew. So from the Hebrew Bedouin to Israeli Arabic, we encounter a complex and dynamic field of linguistic interaction shaped by the asymmetrical power relations between the two languages and their speakers. Part 1 of the book outlines this history and then returns to the late 1920s and early 1930s to reconstruct the dialogue of Sephardi and Mizrahi Jewry with Chaim Nachman Bialik, the most canonical modern Hebrew poet. Bialik corresponded with Daoud Semach, a now forgotten Baghdadi Jewish scholar who, in an ars poetic act, composed a Hebrew poem about Hebrew poetry in honor of Bialik's 60th birthday. A few years earlier, in 1927, Bialik had given a speech to the Sephardi community in Jerusalem, and this speech was reported on at length in the Arabic language Jewish press of Cairo. And that's actually one of the articles. In short, moving between Baghdad, Tel Aviv, Jerusalem, and Cairo, we revisit the formative period before 1948, when open borders permitted the flow of people, texts, and ideas, and the dividing lines being drawn between the two languages had not yet hardened. At the same time, I show how fateful patterns of perception and representation were set in this period, how modern Hebrew was ethnically encoded as Ashkenazi, and how Arab Jews and Palestinians were written out of the cultural center and indeed out of Hebrew literary history itself. Part 2, on the other hand, is all about the presence of borders in post-1948 writing. This section plunges into the bilingual entanglements of Arab writers in Israel. It explores representations of misunderstanding and mistranslation in Arabic prose narrative, as well as allusions to Jewish heritage in Palestinian-authored Hebrew verse. In the third and final section, I address contemporary Mizrahi writing with attention to intersections of recent Mizrahi and Palestinian-Israeli discourses. This part of the book maps out the two main avenues of innovation in Mizrahi uses of language. It explores Mizrahi literature as a space of intervention in which writers challenge the hegemony of standard Israeli Hebrew in favor of creolized Hebrew forms. At the same time, it traces a complementary process, the evolving role of Arabic in the Hebrew work of 3 generations of Mizrahi writers, in which Arabic is gradually transformed from an instrumental language to a symbol or metaphor. First-generation Mizrahim, who were compelled to change their writing language from Arabic to Hebrew, use Hebrew to stand in for Arabic, while younger second-generation Mizrahi writers salvage the linguistic residue of the past to dialogize their representations of immigrant Hebrew and to displace Ivrit Tiknit, or standard Hebrew, as the signifier of Israeli identity. For third-generation writers who are doubly removed from Arabic, the loss of Arabic becomes a preoccupation, a placeholder for their sense of fragmented identity. Now, in the time remaining, I'll focus on one of the most intriguing tropes in third-generation discourse, the presence of absence. The diachronic layering of Hebrew and Arabic upon the landscape of Israel-Palestine elicits a discourse obsessed with ruins and traces. A shared trope of recent Israeli and Palestinian writing and art, the presence of absence also crosses between the two languages. The idea of the presence of absence in Israeli Hebrew discourse may be traced back to Israel's absentee property law of 1950, which created the notorious legal category of nifkadim nochachim, or present absentees, in Arabic al-ghaib al-hadir, denoting Palestinians who left their property during the 1948 war, but remained within the borders of Israel, becoming internal refugees with no legal claim to their lands. Awareness of this issue permeated Jewish-Israeli consciousness largely through David Grossman's 1992 book, Nochachim Nifkadim, which reverses the word order, changing it to absent presentees. Published in English as Sleeping on a Wire, the book presented a collection of interviews with Palestinians in Israel. The presence of absence pervades Israeli and Palestinian discourses from the 2000s onward, appearing in critical writings from the humanities and social sciences. For instance, in a sociological study of Israeli war memorials, and also in the title of a 2008 film, The Presence of Absence, in the ruins of Kafir Biraim on a destroyed Palestinian village. And this is a still from the film. In poetry and prose written in both languages, the presence of absence connotes reality and unreality, memory and forgetting, recognition and denial, and the permeable border between them. Most notably, Mahmoud Darwish's last major work was a poetic autobiography called Fi Hadrat al-Ghayab from 2006, translated by Sinan Antun as In the Presence of Absence. The book elegiacally recapitulates all the important leitmotifs of Darwish's life work, such as language, poetry, exile, Palestine, memory, and forgetting, with references to the presence of absence threading through his haunting meditations. While alluding to Darwish's own mortality, the play on presence and absence also connotes the existential condition of Palestine. In a passage that could be read as relating either to an actual lover or to Palestine, he writes, "I asked you, who is she? You said, she has so many selves that I myself do not know her. She is present and absent. It is as if her presence holds my absence within her, and her absence carries the presence of details." A few pages later, Darwish adds, "The homeland was born in exile. Paradise was born from the hell of absence." Elsewhere in the book, he also invokes the presence of absence in relation to writing poetry, to creating and expressing meaning, as well as to the death of Emil Habibi. This leitmotif thus brings together the themes of writing, Palestine, and mortality, which in Darwish's later poetics are closely intertwined. But it seems to me that the tension between presence and absence in his work goes all the way back to Darwish's very early material, such as his celebrated poem Identity Card, where the speaker asserts his presence as a Palestinian against a politics of erasure, but paradoxically without claiming a name or identity, stating repeatedly, "Ana Arabi, ana ism bila laqab." I am an Arab, I am a name without a title. Darwish's preoccupation with the idea of presence and absence is also echoed in recent scholarship on Palestinian writing. For instance, Ibrahim Mahawi of Columbia writes in 2006, the same year that Darwish's last book was published, "Palestine is not the West Bank, and it is not Gaza, and it is not the West Bank and Gaza combined. It is not the Palestinian Authority, and it is not Israel. Palestine exists in exile as a signifier whose signified seems to be endlessly postponed. Like the Buddha's self, it is something that is and is not. It is both present and absent." Around the same time, that is around the mid-2000s, the presence of absence becomes a recurring theme in Mizrahi Hebrew writing and art, where it relates to the absence of Arabic from contemporary Israeli Jewish life. This transvaluation of Arabic represents an inversion of the ideas of the early days of Jewish immigration to Palestine, when, as we saw with the Hebrew Bedouin, Zionist settlers symbolically became present in the land through the prototype of the Arabic-speaking Palestinian. In this recent turn, however, Mizrahim are not objectifying Palestinians as figures of envy, fear, or disdain, but rather they're imagining themselves as post-Arabic subjects, often in solidarity with Palestinian narratives of loss. In such works, Arabic hovers beneath the surface as a trace or a ghostly presence. The authors cultivate the effect of a modern Israeli Hebrew literature written over the incomplete erasure of Arabic language and culture, a palimpsestic textual formation with obvious structural correspondences to the spatial realities of Israel, much of which was literally built over the ruins of the Palestinian past. Indeed, throughout this decade, the loss of Arabic becomes a central concern of Mizrahi discourses of identity. In 2007, a group of young Mizrahi activists announced its arrival in an anthology called Tehudot Zehut, Hador HaShlishi Kotev Mizrachit, which translates as Echoing Identities, the Third Generation Writes Mizrahish. The title plays on the collocation Teudot Zehut, identity cards, replacing Teudot for documents with the near homophone Tehudot, echoes. It also replaces Ivrit, Hebrew, with Mizrachit, Mizrahish, suggesting that the discourse on Mizrachiyut, Mizrahi identity, has taken on a linguistic identity of its own. The volume's contributors, born from the late 1960s to the early 1980s, embodied the realization of Israel's systematic drive to Hebraicize its Jewish population. Not only do members of this third generation, by and large, speak no Arabic, but most have no firsthand experience of life in the Arab world or Arabic culture. Third generation Mizrahi writers thus face a very different linguistic dilemma than that of fully bilingual writers, such as Sami Michael and Shimon Balas, or even partially bilingual writers, such as Ronit Matalon and Sami Berdugo, who write only in Hebrew, but who do have access to French and colloquial Arabic and bring them into their work. Notwithstanding their overtures to Arabic or Arab Jewish identity, in reality, most third-generation Mizrahi writers have no genuine alternative to Hebrew. Paradoxically, both the loss of Arabic and the desire for its recovery invigorate third-generation Mizrahi creativity. In 2002, a major Mizrahi art exhibit and film festival called Sfat Em, Mother Tongue, was convened. This image is from that, it's older than that, but it was exhibited in that collection. And this is by an artist named Meir Gal. It's a very well-known image called 9 out of 400, in which he is holding a history textbook. That's the history of the Jewish people. And that was a standard textbook that was used for many years in the Israeli educational system. And he's holding the 9 single pages that refer to the history of non-European Jews. That is, Jews who are not Ashkenazi. And then this is another image of his that also exhibited, which I think is self-explanatory. 2 years later, a lengthy volume titled Chazut Mizrachit, Hoveh Hana Besvach Avaro Ha'aravi, Eastern Appearances, a present moving in the thicket of its Arab past, merged a catalog of the art exhibit with a collection of essays on issues of language and identity, Hebrew, Arabic, and Judeo-Arabic, presence and absence. In her introduction to the catalog, itself published trilingually in English, Hebrew, and Arabic, Tal Ben-Zvi, the exhibit's curator, focuses on language as a theme in Mizrahi visual art. In it, she writes, Arabic was and is a mother tongue for many Israelis, including second-generation Mizrahi Jews. Some of the artists participating in the exhibition have spoken Arabic since childhood, as it was a language spoken at home. But for most of the artists, Arabic is like a present absence that informs their biographies and lingers in their memories on the familial and communal levels. So then, if for Darwish and Mohawi, the presence of absence signifies Palestine, for Ben-Zvi, what is being signified is Arabic as a Jewish language. Similar efforts to recover Arabic or to poeticize its absence reverberate throughout Israeli art, literature, and scholarship of the new millennium. A year after the Mother Tongue exhibit, the journal Hakivun Mizrach, Eastward Bound, produced a bilingual Hebrew-Arabic issue titled Al-Adab Bein Loratain, Hasifrut Ben Shtei Safot, Arabic and Hebrew, respectively, for literature between two languages. The cover image, an abstract representation of a man and a woman, identified by their mustache and lips, are an embrace over which the Hebrew and Arabic titles are superimposed, suggesting a passionate bilingual entanglement. In fact, the image is a graphic representation of an iconic movie poster in which the actress pictured there is the famous Jewish Egyptian singer and actress Layla Murad, who lived from her dates were 1918 to 1995. She is the diva of Egypt's cinematic golden age, gazing into the eyes of her co-star Anwar Wegdi. Okay, and everybody knows that she was Jewish. It's very well known. So here you can see, right, how it's adapted. But the image itself in the cover makes them both present and absent by suggesting them just through their outlines, right, without any identifying features. The journal's back cover displays a picture of a red tapestry emblazoned with a dark green, almost black triangle. Filling the space of the triangle are the Arabic words Ana Yehudi, I am a Jew, which leap out at the viewer from the dark background. This work by Israeli artist Chaim Maor originally exhibited in a Tel Aviv gallery in 1990. The image is simultaneously evocative of multiple pasts. The tapestry's fringes hint, perhaps not without irony, at an oriental carpet, which in one context may connote a lost home, and in another, oriental kitsch. At the same time, the sewn-on emblem inscribed with the word Jew may allude to darker memories from the collective Jewish past. Yet it is also an inversion and reclamation of the forced badge of identity, as the Ana, I, turns Yehudi, Jew, into an affirmative statement rather than a pejorative label. This artwork distills the message of the anti-normative project of Arab-Jewish identity. Moreover, insofar as most Jewish viewers would not be able to read the Arabic letters, the orthography itself does the work of reminding the viewer of the absence of Arabic. And in this sense, it too is a statement about the presence of absence. But it was in 2005 when a then unknown student by the name of Almog Behar won the annual short story contest sponsored by Haaretz, Israel's highbrow daily newspaper, that the absence of Arabic was made present with a vengeance. Of mixed Iraqi, Turkish, and German Jewish descent, Behar was raised in a traditional but not religiously observant family, in a monolingual Hebrew environment, yet his literary project revives the language and spirit of multilingual Sephardi Judaism. His winning story, which launched his literary career, was titled Ana min al Yahood, Arabic for I am one of the Jews, or I am of the Jews. The story was translated into Arabic and reprinted in Al-Hilal, a major Egyptian cultural journal. So both the Hebrew original and the Arabic translation were then reprinted in Behar's first short story collection by the same title, Ana min al Yahood. And here too, the striking image of the final page of the Hebrew abutting the first page of the Arabic translation makes a very strong graphical statement. More than any previous literary work, Ana min al Yahood confronted Israel's erasure of Arabic as a Jewish language and explored the inheritance of linguistic memory. The poetic and prosodic qualities of the text render it a transgeneric piece somewhere between prose poem and story. As we'll see shortly, Behar repeats some of the story's language later in a poem. The text's crossover from story to prose poem is also accentuated by the unusual choice to fully vocalize the accompanying Arabic translation in the story collection, as Arabic prose is not usually vocalized. Poetry, yes, but not prose. So Behar's surreal tale begins with the outbreak of a mysterious virus that causes native young Israelis to revert to the diasporic accents of their immigrant grandparents. In the narrator's case, it's the Iraqi Arabic accent of his deceased grandfather. Although the pathogen initially affects Mizrahim, it eventually spreads to the Ashkenazi population. And the narrator reports that this dibuk is now haunting the Ashkenazim too. The reference to the dibuk, in Ashkenazi folklore, a disembodied spirit that possesses living bodies, cleverly makes this a story about Israel's dispossession of all diasporic languages, including Yiddish. Yet the dibuk possessing Israeli Hebrew speech does not actually restore diasporic languages. It only brings back diasporic accents. The narrator searches in vain for a return to Arabic. Indeed, the story's only Arabic statement is the titular Ana min al Yahood, written in an almost prophetic idiom in first-person narration without a straightforward plot. Ana min al-Yahood reads like a meditation on the dispossession of language and the return of the repressed. But it offers no resolution. It is not a story about recovery, either in the literal sense of recovering from an illness, symbolized here as the language plague, or in the figurative sense of recovering a lost language or identity, for the narrator achieves neither. The accent, a middle ground between foreignness and nativity, works in the story to reverse the multi-generational process of linguistic naturalization, symbolically transforming native speakers back into immigrants, and thus reversing Zionist teleology. Behar then further complicates this tale of linguistic dispossession by writing it in an anachronistic, quasi-rabbinic Hebrew, vaguely reminiscent of the language of Shai Agnon. This weird Hebrew contributes to the reader's sense of disorientation while following the narrator's disjointed, almost delirious recounting of his affliction. The presence of Arabic as an absent language, or the presence of its absence, is the story's center of gravity, mentally addressing his Iraqi-born parents, who had once struggled to purge their Hebrew of all traces of Arabic influence. The narrator muses, "I write poems of opposition to Hebrew in Hebrew, because I have no other language to write in, for out of shame you did not bequeath me a thing." The story represents not only the narrator's cry against the theft of his linguistic and cultural inheritance, but his confrontation of his parents' generation. He continues, "And the language that has become my language commands me to pour my soul in it, to be an empty flute, khalil, for its gusts of air, until together we produce a sound, and together we become a hoarse nai." It's the Arabic flute. So from Hebrew flute to Arabic flute. "We will be disguised as a different language, an absent language. This union between the Arabic language and the narrator seemingly transforms him as an instrument of language from the Hebrew khalil, flute, into the Arabic flute, the nai. Yet it is not a genuine transformation as much as a disguise, for the narrator then says that both he and the nai were the costume of an absent language, again evoking the presence of absence. The story is unabashedly political in its integration of the Arabic language, Arab-Jewish identity, and the Palestinian past, a triad that could be described as the soft underbelly of the collective Israeli psyche. Early in the story, in the course of his wanderings through the streets of Jerusalem, the narrator is detained by the police, who mistake him for a Palestinian suicide bomber. The narrator tries to explain to the police that he's Jewish, but the words come to him only in Arabic. What's more, he's unable to voice them. Furthermore, his response is not "Ana Yehudi," I'm Jewish, but rather "Ana min al-Yahud." Again, I'm one of the Jews, or I'm of the Jews, or even from the Jews, a more ambiguous, less direct, and somewhat less idiomatic response. This unvoiced statement is the story's only full sentence in Arabic, and it is also the only explicit statement of identity, but the narrator's inability to articulate it locks him in silence. Elsewhere, wandering through West Jerusalem, the narrator imagines what it might have looked like, through East, he is in West Jerusalem, but he's in the old Arabic sections of it. The narrator imagines what it might have looked like had history taken a different path, and he attempts to converse with the apparitions of the exiled Palestinians. So here a long quote follows. He says, "And I would walk through the wealthy Palestinian streets, and I thought that perhaps they would speak to me respectfully, not like the policemen. I do not succeed in commingling with them because all I have at my disposal is Hebrew with an Arabic accent, and my Arabic, which doesn't come from my home but from the army, is suddenly mute, choked in my throat, cursing itself without uttering a word, hanging in the suffocating air of the refuges of my soul, hiding from family members behind the shutters of Hebrew. And all the time, when I tried to speak to them in the small, halting vocabulary of the Arabic I knew, what came out was Hebrew with an Arabic accent, until they thought that I was ridiculing them. And had my accent not been so Iraqi, had it not been for that, they would have been certain that I was making fun of them. But like that, with the accent, they were confused. They thought I was making fun of the Iraqis, the Saddam Husseins, or maybe some old Iraqi who had kept his accent but forgotten his language. And I didn't make friends there even though I wanted to. I had lost their language, and they didn't know my language. and between us remained the distance of the police forces and the generations. So here the narrator identifies an alternative language community and unsuccessfully attempts to interpolate himself into it. Crucially, he remains outside both the Hebrew and Arabic speech communities. The language of this section is also worked into a poem called Ha'aravit Sheli Ilemet, My Arabic is Mute, that appeared in Behar's first volume of poetry, published just months before the story collection. And like the story, this particular single poem, only this poem, appears side by side with its Arabic translation. My Arabic is mute, choked from the throat, cursing itself without getting out a word, sleeping in the stifling air of the shelters of my soul, hiding from the rest of the family behind Hebrew shutters. And my Hebrew storms, dashing from room to room and the neighbors' porches, making its voice heard to many, prophesizing the coming of God and bulldozers. Then she takes her place in the living room, putting on airs openly on the lip of her skin, concealed between the pages of her flesh, naked one moment and clothed the next. She shrinks into the armchair, asking the forgiveness of the heart. My Arabic is frightened, quietly poses as Hebrew, with every knock at her gates, whispers to friends, Ahlan, ahlan, welcome. And for every policeman she passes in the street, she pulls out her papers, pointing out the protective clause, Ana min al-Yahood, Ana min al-Yahood. And my Hebrew is deaf, sometimes so very deaf. The poem is a distillation of the story. Both express the struggle of Arabic to make itself heard. In its preoccupation with the idea of absence, Behar's story finds a close counterpoint in the 2010 novel Tu Jaffa, in Hebrew El Yafo, a first novel by Ayman Sikseck, a young Palestinian-Israeli writer and journalist. Like Behar, Sikseck studied literature at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. His debut novel follows a Palestinian-Israeli student who inhabits the no man's land between Arabic and Hebrew in multiple ways, moving between the brash, earthy Arabic-Hebrew milieu of Jaffa and the austere Hebrew environment of the university in Jerusalem, as well as moving between intimate entanglements with a Muslim woman who's engaged to another man and a Jewish woman who's an equally impossible match. And once again, the narrator's relationship to both Hebrew and Arabic is uncertain, even though in this case he is bilingual. In the first chapter, he admits that he doesn't understand the forceful, shattering Arabic of guests who visit his family's home. And in another chapter, he's criticized by an Arab bookseller who assumes that he's entranced with Hebrew literature, but unfamiliar with major Palestinian authors such as Ghassan Kanafani. The disassociated narrator-observer who exhibits self-awareness of his liminality and his linguistic limitations is part and parcel of Sikseck's literary affect. Although Sikseck's wry tone and realism are hardly like the calculated anachronisms and surreal style of Behar, Tu Jaffa resonates with Ana min al-Yahood, and that it is very much a third-generation piece. In an interview with Haaretz, Sikseck self-identifies as a member of the, quote, irreverent third generation of the Nakba that rejects the complicity and fear of previous generations, whom he holds accountable for the silencing of Palestinian history and of the Nakba in Israeli society. In Behar and Sikseck's respective works, one senses the convergence of a third-generation sensibility. For Sikseck, the point zero of this generational sequence is the Nakba, whereas for Behar and other Mizrahi writers, it's their elders' immigration to Israel. At times, Sikseck's Jaffa reads as though it's on a symbolic continuum with Behar's Jerusalem. Through three interrelated scenes, the ruins of the Palestinian past intersect with the dispossession and repossession of language. In the first example, the narrator hunts for linguistic traces of the pre-1948 Palestinian past in Jaffa, such as the words Palestine Fund inscribed in Arabic and English on a sewage drain cover, or a plaque with the Arabic name of a school, a Zahra, dated 1938. He tells an elusive addressee, understood to be Palestine, that he has found her, and he records each sighting of Palestine in a notebook. In a highly symbolic scene, he decides to take a sharp rock and etched the word Palestine in Hebrew letters into the ground so that, quote, from now on, passersby will know that you are here in Hebrew too. But before he can proceed, he is chased away by a suspicious Jewish resident. In the second scene in question, the narrator's mother spontaneously takes him to visit the ruins of her childhood home in the Ajami neighborhood of Jaffa, coincidentally the same neighborhood whose name forms the title of that other movie that I showed you in the beginning. Mother and son stand silently before the mounds of sand and bits of metal that offset the backside of the new luxury constructions owned by Jewish Israelis dotting the seascape. The idea of writing Palestine in Hebrew letters is then inverted in another scene towards the book's end, when the narrator picks up a stick and uses it to write the letter Aleph, the first letter of the Arabic alphabet, in a puddle of car oil. This is important not only thematically but visually, as in this scene, the letter Aleph is represented typographically in Arabic script, a single Arabic letter intruding into the visual unity of the Hebrew text. On the thematic level, however, as opposed to engraving a word into the ground, etching a letter into oil is only a temporary act of inscription. The material presence of the Aleph in that printed text thus counterweighs the ephemeral Aleph in the puddle of oil that will momentarily disappear. So to compare the two scenes involving writing, the inscription of the name Palestine in Hebrew letters is intended as a permanent reminder of the past, but it's never actually completed. If you remember, he's chased away, whereas the letter Aleph in Arabic is fleetingly written, but vanishes almost instantaneously. If the sight of the mother's ruined home evokes the presence of absence in terms of the built landscape, these two unfulfilled moments of linguistic resistance signify the elusive and often concealed or suppressed presence of Arabic and Palestinian memory in Israeli society. Utilized by both Palestinians and Jewish Israelis, and in both Arabic and Hebrew, the presence of absence is a generative trope that encapsulates the paradoxes of experience explored in my book, an experience that itself arises at the seams of Israel-Palestine, Hebrew-Arabic, and Arab-Jew, signifying pre-1948 Palestine, or the loss of the Arabic language or the repressed Arab-Jewish past. This trope unsettles statist conceptions of language, of history, and of cultural belonging. Above and beyond its ability to demonstrate the limits of conventional language politics, the writing of the Hebrew-Arabic no man's land crystallizes some of the issues at the forefront of comparative literary studies, namely translation, the cultural politics of memory, and contested multilingualisms. It distills the struggle between languages, or even between linguistic registers and dialects, in highly politicized situations of the type that Emily Apter has called a translation zone at war. As a case study, the literature and art of the Hebrew-Arabic no man's land thus offers an intensified representation of the same tensions that inform many other embattled translation zones. But what sets this case apart is the unique relationship of the languages in conflict. As two closely related languages with a relationship dating back over a millennium, Arabic and Hebrew hardly reflect the relational model from which post-colonial theory developed. The idea of shared roots in the double sense of both morphological and historical roots profoundly informs this collective body of literature written between the two languages and insinuates itself into the discourse of difference. The result may be ferociously ironic, as in the case of Habibi, or eerily uncanny, as in the case of Behar. But either way, it is a literature infused with a heightened self-awareness of language. This metalinguistic hyper-awareness is the sine qua non of the zone of poetic trespass, where impossibility is the essential condition of creation. Thank you.